Some dreams vanish by morning, but others refuse to fade because they carry something more. A warning, a glimpse. In Japan, a woman drew her dreams. In America, a prophet whispered secrets to presidents. And on the internet, a man claiming to be from the year 2062 told people to run before it was too late. They never met. They never knew each other. Yet somehow, all three pointed to the same moment in time. August 2025, a date marked by rising oceans, a war no one wants to believe, and a land that should not exist emerging from beneath the sea. Coincidence or convergence? In today's video, we unravel a mystery that spans decades, continents, and possibly even time itself. Because if these three voices were right, then the future is not waiting. It's already here. In 1999, tucked away in a quiet corner of a bookstore in Japan, a small self-published manga appeared. Its cover was plain. No famous names, no bright illustrations, just 5 quiet words that barely drew attention. The future I saw. Most who saw it simply walked past, and those who did pick it up only found a series of rough pencil sketches, strange images, scribbled notes in the margins, and scenes that made little sense. Flooded cities, cracked highways, names with no explanation. It looked less like a story and more like a dream journal, and that's exactly what it was. Because what this unknown artist, using only the name Tatsuki, had drawn were not characters or imagination. They were visions, 15 of them, dreams she had seen and remembered, not because they were beautiful, but because they refused to leave her. She said the first one came when she was only 9 years old. A man with silver hair would visit her in her sleep. He never said who he was, only that he came from somewhere ahead of now. Together, they would walk under moonlight, and he would quietly tell her about events that hadn't happened yet. Not just events in her own life, but events that would shake the world. Tatsuki didn't understand it then, and perhaps she never truly did, but she started writing them down, not in words but in images. Because some dreams don't speak, they show. The first time it happened for real, she was just a teenager. In 1976, she dreamed of a man singing under a spotlight, full of life and music, until suddenly he collapsed. She recognized the face. It was Freddie Mercury. At the time, he was at the peak of his career. No one would have believed anything could happen to him, but Tatsuki, unsettled by what she saw, quietly drew it down in her journal. 15 years later, on November 24, 1991, Freddie Mercury passed away. The footage she saw on television, the candle-lit vigils, the plans for a movie in his honor, matched her dream with disturbing precision. Still, she tried to ignore it, tried to tell herself it was just coincidence until it happened again and again. In 1992, she dreamed of a painting, a blonde woman holding a child, the word Dana scrawled beneath it. Then a crash, screams, metal folding in the dark. She woke up shaken but drew it anyway. 5 years later, on August 31st, 1997, Princess Diana was killed in a car crash in Paris. And once again, her old sketch matched the scene. By now, she had stopped pretending it wasn't real. These dreams were not symbols, they were messages, and the time between dream and reality followed a strange pattern. 5 years, 10, 15. Some visions took decades to arrive. Others came quickly. But one thing was constant. They always came. In 1995, she dreamed of devastation. A city torn in half, dust in the air, people crying beneath fallen concrete. When she woke up, she wrote a single line in her notebook. Something will rupture in 15 days. 15 days later, the Great Hanshin earthquake, also known as the Kobe earthquake, struck Japan. Over 6,000 lives were lost, and Tatsuki, now an adult, stopped drawing just for herself. She began compiling everything. She created the book the world would one day rediscover. But when it was released in 1999, no one noticed. Not yet. Then came 2011. On March 11th, Japan was rocked by the most powerful earthquake in its history. A tsunami swallowed entire towns. Nuclear reactors failed. The entire world held its breath. And in the chaos, someone remembered a strange manga from years ago. A book that showed a wave, a date, 311. A nation submerged. Thousands began hunting for the comic. Online communities tore it apart, page by page. And when they tallied up the dreams, 12 and a half of them had already come true. That's when the mystery deepened. Because no one knew who Tatsuki was. The publishing address was inactive. The pen name offered no leads. She had disappeared. For over 2 decades, the author of the book that predicted disasters remained invisible. No interviews, no photographs, nothing. Some believed it was a hoax. Others thought she might not be one person, but a group. Or something worse, an artificial voice designed to manipulate belief. Then, in 2023, just as talk of her prophecy was returning online, Tatsuki reappeared. Quietly, she re-released her book, this time expanded, with full pages of explanation, dates, memories, and a terrifying update. She revealed that she had been born in 1954. She had lived an ordinary life in Kanagawa Prefecture, loved singing, enjoyed painting, but since childhood she had carried a weight, dreams that weren't hers, images that came uninvited, and one man always there, silver hair, gentle eyes, whispering the future. And among all the dreams she ever had, one remained, the final one, the one that hadn't happened. She saw herself standing high above the ocean south of Japan. Beneath her, the sea began to bubble. 2 massive dragons, shapes of coiled energy, emerged from the deep, twisting in silence. Then an eruption. A column of water pierced the sky, tsunamis like none before, and after the waves fell, something rose from the sea. New land. Dark, jagged, ancient, forming a bridge between Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and the Philippines. She had dreamed this twice, once in 1999, again in 2021. This time, she knew she couldn't stay silent, because the date was clear. 5:0 a.m. July 5th, 2025. When asked why she finally came forward, Tatsuki said something that chilled even skeptics. "I don't expect everyone to believe, but if even a few prepare, maybe the loss won't be as great." Some say it's all metaphor. Others see it as poetry. But those who have followed her since the 1970s know one thing. So far, she has never been wrong. Long before smartphones, satellites, or digital records, There was a woman who claimed she could see the future with nothing more than a glance into the unknown. Her name was Jeane Dixon, and for nearly half a century, her predictions would shake presidents, stir controversy, and make her one of the most mysterious figures in American history. She wasn't born into power or privilege. She came into the world in 1904 in the quiet town of Medford, Wisconsin. Her family was Catholic, traditional, and loving. But from the moment she could speak, Jeane Dixon was different. At the age of 5, she asked her mother for an envelope with a black border. Her mother told her there was no such thing, but the child insisted. 10 days later, a letter arrived announcing the death of her grandfather. The envelope was bordered in black. Her parents were startled, but they didn't yet understand. Not until Jeane started making predictions more specific, more personal. At 7, she told her mother their father would return from a business trip with a black and white dog. It sounded like nonsense, until he walked in, smiling with that exact dog by his side. Soon, word spread. Neighbors came for advice. Strangers asked questions they didn't want others to hear. And one day, a traveling Egyptian palm reader met the young Jeane and gasped. "This child," she said, "is a prophet." She handed Jeane a silk cloth and a small crystal sphere. When Jeane touched it, her eyes went distant, and in a whisper, she told the woman to be careful near the stove. Days later, the woman burned her hand in a kitchen accident. By the time she was a teenager, her visions were no longer just about family. They stretched farther, to people she had never met, to events she could not possibly know, and sometimes to tragedy. But it wasn't until the 1940s that the world began to pay attention. On January 10, 1942, Jeane walked into a beauty salon. It wasn't just any salon. It was one favored by the elite of Washington, D.C. There she met the famous actress Carole Lombard. Jeane approached her, voice low, face pale. She said, "Please, for the next 6 months do not fly. There is danger." Carole smiled politely and brushed it off. She had a flight scheduled in just a few days. She boarded it anyway. 6 days later, the plane crashed into a mountain. Everyone on board died. That was the first warning Jeane gave that came true in public view. But it would not be the last. In 1944, Jeane received a quiet call. "The president would like to see you." She was brought to the White House, where Franklin D. Roosevelt waited, not as a president but as a man. He asked her a single question: "How much longer do I have?" Jeane didn't flinch. She said softly, "No more than 6 months." He died in April 1945. When Harry S. Truman stepped into office, Jeane wasn't surprised. Years earlier, she had already told him he would become president. At the time, he had laughed. He didn't laugh afterward. As the years passed, Jeane Dixon became known as the Seer of Washington. Her phone rang in times of crisis. She met with politicians, generals, and even the Vatican. But her most haunting prediction came in 1956. She told Parade magazine that the Democratic nominee for president would win the 1960 election, and that he would die in office, assassinated. The public laughed. The prediction was forgotten until 1963. President John F. Kennedy was shot in Dallas. Jeane said she had seen it again just weeks before. a black cloud over the White House, a plaque outside his office being wiped clean, and a name strange and incomplete. She saw it begin with an O, the second letter an S, and the final one curling like a hook. Lee Harvey Oswald. It was all there. After that, no one laughed at her predictions, not publicly. But Jeane Dixon wasn't just focused on individuals. She also saw things that span generations, wars, plagues, and something far greater. In her 1971 book, The Call to Glory, she described a vision of a war in the year 2020. But it would not be a war of bombs or bullets. It would be a war of disease. When COVID-19 struck in 2020, many returned to that page. A strange battle had begun, and it fit her words exactly. But that wasn't the part that haunted people the most. It was what she said came next. She warned that the year 2025 would mark a turning point in human history, a shift between two powers in Asia, a bloody struggle not just of politics or borders, but for the soul of the future. Jeane claimed that China would emerge victorious, and that a new leader, someone of immense love, would rise, not as a politician, but as a healer. The idea seemed distant in the 70s. Now, in 2025, it feels much closer. What made her predictions more unsettling was their precision. They did not come from vague metaphors. She gave names, dates, and most of all, she gave warnings. She once said, "Yes, there will be war, but at the same time a person of compassion will appear. He will reconnect what humanity has broken, and through him peace will be possible." Could this be the same new land Tatsuki saw in her dream? A land born from destruction, a land that reshapes the future. Two women, different languages, different decades, yet somehow both pointed to the same year. Coincidence is easy to believe, until it happens too many times. Then we are left with only one question: what comes next? In November 2010, a cryptic message appeared on an anonymous Japanese internet forum. The post was short, strange, and seemed to come out of nowhere. Its author made an extraordinary claim. "I come from the year 2062. At first, no one believed it. Why would they? Time travel was still science fiction, and the internet was filled with hoaxes and attention seekers. But what made this post different wasn't just the claim. It was what came next. At the bottom of the message, there was a strange string of text, a mix of Japanese symbols and phonetic codes. Most readers ignored it, but a few began decoding it, and what they found was unsettling. One line stood out clearly: "Run to the mountains." No context, no explanation, just that. The message faded into obscurity until 4 months later. On March 11, 2011, Japan was hit by the most devastating earthquake in its recorded history. The magnitude 9.0 quake triggered a tsunami that destroyed entire coastal towns. Over 15,000 lives were lost, and a nuclear crisis followed. It was in the aftermath that someone remembered the old message: "Run to the mountains." The same warning, the same country, the same disaster. Suddenly, that forgotten post no longer felt like a joke. It felt like a prophecy, and the internet erupted. The anonymous user, now called simply 2062, was no longer dismissed. He became a figure of fascination, of fear, and of growing belief. Then, in July 2011, he returned. This time he answered questions. Only a few. He said very little, but before he vanished again, he left another message. He would return in April 2016. He kept his word. On April 14, 2016, a powerful earthquake struck Kumamoto, Japan. Buildings collapsed, lives were lost, and the very next day, on April 15, 2062, posted again, just as he said he would. It was now a pattern, he warned. Then disaster struck. Then he reappeared. And with each return, people took him more seriously, but he never revealed everything. He gave no full names, no details about his identity, just glimpses, pieces, as if he knew he couldn't say more. In his 2016 appearance, he promised to return once more on May 17, and as expected, on May 16, another earthquake hit. This time in Ibaraki Prefecture near Tokyo. That was 3 appearances, 3 accurate warnings. And now even skeptics began to pay attention, because coincidence can only be used as an excuse so many times. When asked how he could know these events, 2062 finally offered an explanation. He said time travel was real, and that in the future humanity had developed 2 devices. The first was called the Vicious 5000. It moved people forward in time. The second was called the Plusneck 6290. It allowed people to travel back. But these devices were not toys. They were not in the hands of individuals. They were tightly controlled by an organization called the Temporal Management Bureau. This agency, he said, governed the laws of time and punished anyone who broke them. He described time as a living structure, a force that can detect foreign influence. If a traveler disrupted the flow of events, time would react and erase them completely. That was why, he explained, he always disappeared. He could only stay in the past for a limited window, too long, and he risked being erased from history itself. And that was why he could never answer the questions people truly wanted to ask. Who will win the next election? Will there be another war? Can we stop what's coming? He refused to answer. Or perhaps he was forbidden to. But in one rare moment, someone asked him the question that haunted everyone. Would there be a third world war? His answer was chilling. Yes. He said it would happen before the year 2030, and that the world would not recognize the first shot, because the war would not begin with fire. It would begin with silence. He claimed it would be born from long-standing tensions between 2 major Asian powers. He refused to say which ones, but said the conflict would not stay confined. It would spread to Russia, to the United States, to the Middle East, to Europe. And the weapons used would not be nuclear. They would be worse, chemical, invisible. Slow and agonizing. He said Japan would be nearly erased. Cities turned to wastelands. The nation forced to flee itself. A country of refugees, a broken home. Then 2062 vanished, for good. But before he disappeared, he left behind 2 final warnings. The first was direct. A major earthquake will occur off the coast of Japan on July 4th, 2025. The second was even more cryptic. In 2024, something significant will happen. We now live in 2025, and when we look back, we can't ignore what 2024 brought. the hottest year in recorded history, superstorms that crippled cities, floods in Afghanistan, and typhoons across Asia. Were these the events he saw, or are they only the beginning? And if the earthquake he warned about is still ahead, then time is running out. Because his prediction, July 4th, 2025, comes just one day before the dream seen by Tatsuki. July 5th, 5:00 a.m., the moment the ocean breaks open, the moment a new land rises. Three visions, three warnings, all pointing to the same week. A manga artist, a presidential prophet, a nameless traveler. Were they separated by time or connected by fate? No one can say for sure. But if history has taught us anything, it is this. Those who ignored the first warning never saw the second coming, and those who ignored the second never had time to respond to the third. Three lives, three timelines, three warnings. They lived in different countries. They spoke different languages. They never met. And yet each one pointed toward the same moment in time. The year 2025. A year seen not by one prophet but by three. A year foretold by dream, by vision, and by message across time. Tatsuki saw it in her sleep, a wave higher than any in history, two dragons rising from beneath the sea, and a new land surfacing from the deep, reshaping the map of Asia. She saw the exact hour, the exact day, July 5th, 5:00 a.m. Jeane Dixon foresaw a global turning point, a battle between rising powers. A time of war followed by the rise of someone filled with compassion. She warned that humanity would split in two, those who seek power and those who seek healing. She gave the year, 2025, and 2062 left behind a final coded message. A major earthquake would strike on July 4th, 2025. He said nothing of waves or dragons, but his warning landed just 24 hours before Tatsuki's dream, and one day after Dixon's vision was predicted to begin. Each prophecy came from a different angle, but they spiraled toward the same epicenter, as if time itself had marked the date and was now waiting for humanity to notice. Some say prophecy is nothing more than chance, that dreams are the random firings of a sleeping mind, that predictions, even the correct ones, only survive because of our human tendency to connect unrelated things. But what if they're not unrelated? What if they're pieces of a larger design, one we're only just beginning to see? Tatsuki the dreamer saw disaster followed by rebirth, land lost but land gained. Dixon the prophet saw suffering, but not without redemption. A man would rise to reconnect humanity's broken spirit. 2062, the traveler saw war and devastation, but not total extinction. Even he believed the timeline could adapt, that warnings could change the future. Three people, 3 decades, 3 points of view, but all carried the same silent message. Prepare, not with fear, but with awareness, because no prophecy is a death sentence. It is an invitation to wake up. There is something haunting about the alignment, because none of them spoke in metaphors. Each gave names, places, dates, and each predicted things long before they came to pass. In 1999, Tatsuki published her book, No One Listened. In 1956, Dixon predicted Kennedy's assassination. People forgot. In 2010, 2062 said, Run to the mountains. They laughed, and each time reality arrived, not as myth, but as fact. The truth is, prophecies only become real to us after it's too late. We remember them after the damage. We search for meaning after the silence. We believe only when belief can no longer protect us. But perhaps this time it's different. Because never before have three voices spoken so clearly, so independently, yet so precisely in sync. And never before have we had the chance to hear all three before the moment arrives. So the question is no longer, are they right? It is, what if they are? Every generation has asked the same question. Is the future something that can be changed? Or has it already been written long before we were born? When we hear a prophecy, we instinctively doubt it. We call it superstition. We call it coincidence. We laugh. We forget. Until the day it arrives. And then we call it fate. But what if the real purpose of prophecy is not prediction, but preparation? Tatsuki never claimed to be a savior. She simply drew what she saw, a child with dreams, a woman haunted by patterns she could not unsee. Jeane Dixon never forced belief. She offered warnings quietly, often ignored. She spoke to presidents not to change history, but to make them pause, to make them listen. And 2062, whoever he truly was, never demanded trust. He left his messages like footprints in the snow, just enough for those who were looking. None of them begged to be believed. They only spoke. And now the choice belongs to us. We live in a time when disasters are no longer fiction. Pandemics, heat waves, floods, wars, these are not predictions. They are headlines. They are lived experiences. We are not waiting for a future shaped by fantasy. We are standing in it now. So when three different voices, separated by decades and continents, point to the same week in 2025, we must ask, is this really coincidence? Or is it a convergence? Because if there is even the smallest chance that they were right, what should we be doing now? Can we prevent a quake? Can we stop a tsunami? No, but we can choose how we respond. We can choose what we build in the aftermath. And most importantly, we can choose who we become when the world changes around us. Some people spend their lives chasing the future. Others run from it. But the wisest among us do something different. They prepare for it, quietly, humbly, and with open eyes. Maybe we don't need to believe in dragons rising from the sea. Maybe we don't need to see angels or read palms. But if a dream, a voice, or a message makes us pause, even for a moment, then that alone might be enough. Enough to change a decision, enough to save a life, enough to start asking better questions, because prophecy is not a cage. It is a mirror. And sometimes the scariest future is not the one we can't avoid, but the one we refuse to acknowledge. So can the future be changed? Only if we are brave enough to face it, and wise enough to listen before it arrives. Maybe the future isn't waiting to happen. Maybe it's been calling us all along, and now it's our turn to answer.